One of the biggest lies people believe about narcissistic relationships is that once you finally leave, the nightmare ends. A lot of times, that's when the worst part actually starts. Because narcissists usually don't handle rejection like healthy people. They handle it like loss of control. And when somebody spent years controlling your emotions, your attention, and your energy, and even your life, they don't just peacefully accept losing access to you. That's why so many people end up shocked by what happens after the relationship ends. Because you think leaving is going to bring immediate peace. And instead, everything gets louder. The manipulation, the guilt, and the accusations, and also the lies. The attempts to pull you back in emotionally are all very real. And one thing people outside these relationships don't understand is how hard it actually is to leave in the first place. Especially after years of emotional conditioning, especially after your confidence has been stripped down, and especially after you've spent so long questioning your own judgment. By the time many people finally leave, they're emotionally exhausted already, mentally drained, financially damaged, spiritually broken. And that's exactly where I was. If you've watched my channel for a while, you already know pieces of what this relationship ultimately cost me. I've already shared videos about rebuilding afterward. Trying to recover mentally, trying to recover emotionally, and trying to rebuild financially. Even ending up homeless while trying to put my life back together after everything collapsed. Those videos are already here. So when I talk about this part, I'm talking about something I actually lived through. And, one thing narcissists often do after separation is try to rewrite the whole relationship. Suddenly you were the problem. You were the unstable one, the selfish one, the abusive one, and the liar. The difficult partner in all of it. And the scary part is they often start telling that version of the story to other people too. Family, friends, social circles, just anybody who will listen. Because controlling the narrative becomes part of maintaining control over you. And after years of already questioning yourself, that messes with your head badly. Especially when you know the truth. And especially when you know how much you sacrifice trying to save the relationship. And then comes the emotional games. Some narcissists suddenly become emotional again after you leave. They say everything you wanted to hear for years. Promises, apologies, breakthrough moments. Suddenly they understand your pain. Suddenly they want to change. Suddenly they become the person that you spent years begging them to become. All while still painting you as the problem behind your back. Still telling people you were the toxic one, the unstable one, the selfish one. Because even after the relationship ends, controlling the narrative still matters to them. And that's what makes leaving so confusing emotionally. Because part of you desperately wants to believe it's finally real this time, especially when you still love them. Especially when your brain is still addicted to those moments of relief after emotional chaos. That trauma bond is very real. People who haven't lived through it don't fully understand exactly how powerful it is, because you're not just grieving a relationship. You're grieving the version of the relationship that you kept hoping existed. And another thing people don't talk about enough is what narcissistic abuse does to your nervous system after it's all over. Even after you leave, your body still feels stuck in survival mode. You still expect tension. You still over explain yourself. You still feel anxiety over simple things. And sometimes you even feel guilty for finally choosing yourself. That's how deep the conditioning actually goes. And the loneliness afterward can hit hard too, because many people lose relationships during this process, you know, outside of the actual person. Friends, family connections, financial stability, confidence, and sometimes entire versions of their life collapse trying to get free. Mine did. And rebuilding afterward was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. Because when you finally leave a narcissistic relationship, you don't just recover from that person. You have to recover from what that relationship turned you into emotionally. And that takes time, a lot of time. There were moments after I left where I genuinely didn't know who I was anymore. My peace was gone. My confidence was gone. My nervous system was wrecked. And honestly, one of the hardest parts was realizing how much damage I accepted while trying to hold on to somebody who was never truly capable of loving me in a healthy way. That realization hurts deeply, because people like this don't usually love you the way healthy people love. They love the control, the attention, validation, access, what you provide emotionally for them. And once you finally see that clearly, it changes the way you look at the entire relationship. But I'll also say this. In my case, leaving was still the right decision, and I think it is for everyone. Even with everything it cost me, because eventually I realized peace matters more than any attachment. And protecting your mind matters more than protecting the relationship. It took me 5 years to fully understand all of that. And when you're over 50, those years are very precious time. And if you're watching this trying to leave, or after already leaving, I know how confusing this stage can feel. Part of you misses them. Part of you feels relieved. And part of you still questions yourself. Part of you still wants answers that you'll never fully get. That's normal after this kind of psychological damage. But one thing that I want people to understand is healing from a narcissistic abuse isn't just about getting away from the person. It's about reconnecting with yourself again afterwards. Learning to trust your instincts again. Learning what peace actually feels like again. Learning that love should never require you to abandon yourself emotionally just to keep somebody else happy. And eventually, you stop missing that chaos. And you stop romanticizing the beginning that I talked about in video 1 of this series. And you stop blaming yourself for all of it. And slowly, you stop, well, you start to become yourself again. Although not exactly. It's a little different version of the one you started out as. But you're wiser and maybe even more guarded. And you're going to carry scars that you didn't have before, but you're going to come out stronger and more aware of what real peace actually feels like. Because after living in survival mode for that long, peace stops feeling boring. It starts feeling priceless. Thank you.